and happy Tuesday. Hope you're all having a wonderful afternoon or a wonderful evening, depending on where you're calling in from. We'll jump right in to make the most of our hour together. For all of you who are joining us today, in case we haven't met, I'm Ross Overline, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Scholars of Finance. First, want to thank you, all of you who are joining us today for our National Speaker Series. We are very fortunate to have Ann Black, the president of Goldman Sachs Gives, joining us tonight to share her insights on how we can make a positive impact on people's lives through finance and how we can be compassionate leaders in the process. This is especially exciting for us, as compassion is our value of the month for October at Scholars of Finance, and Ann's work at Goldman Sachs Gives is directly creating social impact through finance. And I would even argue the actualization of compassion in finance. For the first 25 to 30 minutes, Ann and I will share a candid discussion centered around her work and her values. And for the second half of the call, as always, we'll open up the discussion for Q&A from our students who are on the line today. So if you can, a couple of quick housekeeping items. Please turn your camera on so we can speak with Ann directly, so she can see her audience, we can all engage. And we'll also take a picture together, a group photo at the end of this to commemorate our time together. Also, if you can mute your mic and be prepared to unmute to ask questions during Q&A. And also when we give our guest a virtual round of applause, that would be great. If you have any questions come up while Ann is speaking, please feel free to use the raise hand feature to enter our queue, or you can just write it down to ask later when we invite our students for open Q&A. And with that, to get right into it, so we can get as much time hearing from Ann as possible, I will introduce Ann and turn it over to her. Here's a bit about Ann. Ann Black is a creative and entrepreneurial philanthropy leader with more than 10 years of executive experience at Goldman Sachs and Goldman Sachs Gives. She focuses on driving change and new ideas that benefit society while also building the firm's culture. Ann worked at the forefront of strategic philanthropy and social impact at a time of great change in our world and in this sector, starting at Goldman Sachs back in 2008. CSR and ESG initiatives have become essential in business, and Ann has collaborated with top corporate executives, clients, and thought leaders who have sought her expertise to understand the trends shaping society and how philanthropy can create a better future and have lasting impact. Today, as I mentioned, she is the president of Goldman Sachs Gives, where she leads their donor advised fund for partners, which has given nearly $1.6 billion in grants and partnered with more than 7,000 nonprofits in more than 100 countries around the world. With that said, if everybody can join me, and please unmute your line, unmute your mic, and just give Ann a quick warm welcome for joining us today. And we're so excited to have you. Amazing. And with that, Ann, I'll turn it over to you to start us off. Why don't you just share a bit about your background and your story?
Sure. Thank you, Ross. I was delighted to get this invitation to speak with all of you. And it's nice to see all of your faces and in these unusual times, but I do think, thankfully, we all really can connect in new and different ways with technology here. And so I think I'll just start by saying that I grew up in the Midwest. In fact, we were just chatting because Jake's wood ceiling caught my eye, and he's in Wisconsin, where I went to camp as I was growing up. But I grew up outside of Chicago, and my family, thankfully, my parents were supportive of me going to a school in a different part of the country, and they said, so long as that's New England. And so I applied to schools in New England. I went to Fairfield University for my undergrad, which some of you might know, it's a small Jesuit school, but I'll come back to that later because I think of one of the threads that has sort of that, as much as I didn't go to church very often, I will say during college, something about this sort of Jesuit education and service has obviously got under my skin and has led to this career choice that I made. So after I went to Fairfield in Connecticut for school, a lot of the recruiting that was done on campus at Fairfield was New York City companies. And so I sort of said to my parents, oh, I'll just do 2 years in New York City and start my career, and then I will be back in Chicago and I'll apply to Northwestern, U Chicago, whatever, and go to business school, because I always sort of knew I would do school, graduate school. I said, oh, I'll be back and I'll apply there. Well, wouldn't you know, I sort of got the New York bug and just ended up staying there. I went to NYU for my MBA. And in fact, I will say then once, then I started my career in New York following NYU. And my connections and my personal network really started being built here in New York. And so now I get back to Chicago periodically, of course, to see my family. But that was sort of an early lesson that I think caught me off guard. I mean, eventually at this stage of my career, and certainly at many stages of your careers, you will be able to move and go to all these cities all over. And I have had that opportunity, but it gets harder and harder to move as your roots grow in a given place. Now my son is in school here, et cetera. I have a life here. So I would just share that. So anyway, all of a sudden now I still call myself a Midwesterner, but at this point I've had more years in New York than in the Midwest. So that's my sort of personal journey. And in that journey, and I think Ross and I will get to this, but my job out of business school was with Barry Diller's company. It's called IAC. At the time I joined, it was called USA Networks. And we had absolutely no corporate philanthropy program set up whatsoever. We were a young startup where Mr. Diller, as we all called him, he was sort of a formal guy. He was buying up a whole bunch of different properties. So this was back when you guys were basically not even born probably, but it was the days of sort of traditional media meeting the early days of tech. So it was companies like CitySearch and Hotels.com and Expedia in the very beginning. And actually our head of business development was Dara Khosrowshahi, who is now the head of Uber, as you guys know. And then also Jeremy Liu was his deputy, and Jeremy Liu is now a big VC guy in Palo Alto. So we had an interesting company working there, and it was this marriage of sort of, as we called it, old media and new media at the time. And anyway, I was the sort of right out of business school working on all sorts of different projects for Mr. Diller. And one of them that sort of stuck out to me was the idea that he asked, let's start giving away some money for charitable reasons as a corporation in the different cities in which we had operations. And then let's also set up an employee matching gift program. And he said, I'll match it out of my personal family foundation. And he had sort of made a fortune in earlier times. So those, I mean, in the scheme of my very busy job and working in that company, this was maybe 1% of my time. I mean, it was like the fine last bullet on the resume at the time. I mean, it was nothing that I sort of thought would become that important to me. But when I had these moments on the weekends where you'd sort of get some downtime and you really thought about what did I like this past week and what really moved me, I really liked that more than sort of the, reading prospectuses of companies we're looking at or helping. I mean, I had a crazy project where I had to, God, I still remember it because it was so sort of torturous. It took my best MBA Excel skills. We basically had to look up every single vendor that we were using across all of our different properties and figure out how we could renegotiate agreements and get the sort of best pricing out of it. So it was like crazy stuff like that really wasn't sort of tickling my heartstrings. And so I really decided at that point to pivot my whole career. And so now, in short, for the last 20 years, I've been working in philanthropy, and I do actually still run into Barry Diller at stuff, and I say to him, thank you for introducing me to this whole field, because I mean, I think I grew up knowing that there were soup kitchens, there were community organizations, but I didn't really have that much of an understanding of it. I think your generation is a little bit more attuned to it than mine was. But anyway, so that's sort of the path. And Ross, I'm happy to get into any details, maybe as we start going through the Q&A.
Yeah, well, and thank you so much for sharing a bit of your journey. It's really interesting to hear both the personal side, both your Midwestern roots and your Northeastern life today, and also to hear a little bit too about the professional side of things and that journey. Would love to hear more about that contrast, right, between your kind of option to go through traditional finance and your ultimate choice to really focus on philanthropy, and just hear more about what your day-to-day looks like in as a philanthropic leader, right? Leading a fund, right, to mobilize capital towards important causes.
Yes, sure. So when I first got into philanthropy, I was actually on the organizational side. So, and you could see this in my LinkedIn or whatever, but I spent 7 years with nonprofits because at the time when I left working for IAC, I really wanted to be close to the issues and sort of really learn a little bit more about this whole business. And so, in fact, whenever I speak sort of with young people, which is pretty often that I'll, whenever I'll meet people in my work, you can sort of in this field, you can work at a nonprofit organization where you are super close to the issues. So you feel, I would say, the most personally satisfied. Then in a next step, you could be at a foundation and perhaps being a grant maker at a foundation and have the opportunity like a big Ford or Carnegie or, all over the tides in San Francisco, a bunch of different grant makers. There, you also have the opportunity to get out in the field and really become a subject matter expert. But you're a step away from actually sitting right across an office from a program director who is literally running programs at a nonprofit. Then there's the final sort of pillar, I would say, would be corporate philanthropy, maybe, and that's where I sit now. And so I am a little bit more removed from the issues. I wish that I had the opportunity to be out in the field and be in a classroom or, be touring some of the women's economic empowerment programs we've done in Africa or whatever it might be. But you get into the pace and the busyness of a corporate job, you probably are not out in the field as much. So I sort of went through that journey where I spent 7 years working for nonprofits at a small nonprofit organization called Mouse, which I loved. There's like 6 of us, and we were getting technology in New York City public schools, and I really truly had the opportunity to be out in schools, and that was very rewarding work. And then from there, I realized that I really was enjoying this. Let me see how a big, huge fundraising operation is run. So that's when I went to the Museum of Natural History, which has like I think there were 40 of us that were doing fundraising, and they raise upwards of $100 million a year for their budget. And you really get a big sense of how these big cultural institutions run. So I was happily working away at the Museum of Natural History on the Upper West Side of New York when I literally read in the newspaper quotes, Lloyd Blankfein at Goldman Sachs's chairman and CEO has announced $100 million to train 10,000 women around the world with a business and management education. And this was 2007, 2008. And I literally thought to myself, oh my gosh, that sounds so cool. I want to be a part of that. And I had not updated my resume in like 5 years. I was really happy at my job. But I just thought this is one of those moments that this sounds so interesting in this sort of world of philanthropy. And, thinking back on it, at the time I was a young woman myself, like many of you. I had just graduated from business school. I had never worked on anything international really in my career. And so that idea really spoke to me of working on something philanthropic that was women in emerging markets. It was really of the moment at the time. There was all of this research coming out of the World Bank and other places that was showing sort of this idea of women's economic empowerment. So you're just sort of hearing about it. And at the time, that was a huge announcement of $100 million. I mean, since that time, we've seen Schwarzman and Paulson and all these, I mean, the numbers of, Facebook went public and then you see the Chan Zuckerberg. I mean, the numbers have gotten so astronomical in terms of what gets good coverage now. But at the time, that was a enormous gift. And I've given this advice to others. I mean, when you have a passion for something, you figure out a way to get in. And so my resume, I got it in. Of course, I heard absolutely, crickets, did not hear a thing from Goldman because I was probably one person out of, a million sending in resumes. I eventually used a friend of mine who was a mentor to place a call on my behalf. And she's probably 10 to 20 years older than I am. She had worked for a while. She was able to call a person who was quoted in that article as the person running this initiative to say, you know, you've got the resume of this young woman, Ann Black, on your desk. She's not a crazy person. You should get her into interview her. And that is how I got into Goldman. And thankfully I made it through the, you know, the process, because it wasn't a traditional, I mean, you guys might have Goldman recruiting on your campuses and things like that. This was, you know, sort of an off schedule, one-off hire. And it wasn't even clear to me that they were hiring. I just read in the press that they had launched a new thing. And I thought to myself, you know what, if they're launching something new, they probably don't have staff set up. The new person who is quoted in this article, this woman, Dina Powell, who is indeed who hired me, I sort of thought to my, you know, it's apparent in the article that Dina Powell had just been hired. And I thought to myself, okay, she probably is getting, I mean, I hate to sound sort of crass, but getting a little bit rid of the old, bringing in some new. So I thought maybe there will be room for new team members. And indeed it worked out. And so sometimes I think, I was just talking with someone recently who was looking for a job in philanthropy. And I sort of said, well, look at that big announcement of a couple months ago that, you know, the Bezos is split and now you have the world's richest woman, his ex-wife, apparently has said, I'm giving away my, you know, fortune. Someone's got to help her do that. And I said, you know, work the network, figure out, that would be an interesting and fun project, go work for Mackenzie Bezos. So I think in these moments, you can sort of think about all of the different potential paths you could go down, and just use your ingenuity and your drive, and that helps you get in the door. So when I joined Goldman, and then I'll go back to you, Ross. When I joined Goldman, I worked on that initiative, 10,000 Women, for a couple of years, and it was phenomenal. You know, I was young and single and happy to get on any plane that they told me. So I saw the world and got to set up that program in many different countries, several different African countries, China, India, Brazil, I mean, the list, Egypt, the list goes on. It was a absolutely amazing professional opportunity. And I really, you know, saw the world. And I think to the point of this discussion of compassion, what was interesting about it is whether it was a woman in our program in Lagos, Nigeria, or a woman that I met in Sao Paulo, Brazil, everyone was just a working woman trying to pay the bills, trying to keep their family happy, their parents happy. I mean, just the same story as all the rest of us, no matter if you're, you know, a fancy corporate person from Goldman Sachs in New York, or this caterer that's in my mind right today of Lagos in Nigeria, who I met, who was in our program. We are all very similar. And that commonality of sort of the human experience was like very profoundly influential on me. And I feel very grateful to have had that opportunity. So I kind of knew I was in a good step and things were going really well. So I did that for a few years, and then a position opened on Goldman Sachs Gives. And Goldman Sachs Gives is our other pool of capital. So the 10,000 programs, as we call them, that you could read about on Goldman Sachs's website, gs.com, but those are funded out of our foundation. We also have a donor advised fund, and donor advised fund is Goldman Sachs Gives. That's now what I run. So I joined as the COO of the fund, and a few years ago, they promoted me to be the president. And what I love about Goldman Sachs Gives is that every 15 minutes of my day might be different. I work across a whole range of topics, working with a whole bunch of different nonprofit organizations and people, and my clients are the firm's partners, our senior most people. So I really get to know a stellar group of people. And the variety of topics keeps it sort of very alive. And that's the beauty of my job today. I mean, I loved the women's program, but it was, after a few years, it was like all day, every day, women's economic empowerment, which I loved, but now the variety is kind of nice of what I do today.
Mm-hmm. And that's incredibly interesting. I think especially hearing the story of the immediate impact that you got to make, right, through that initiative, this Women's Economic Empowerment Initiative that Leigh Blankfein had initiated with the team. Mm-hmm. And when you had talked about your travels, right, talking to women and people across the world, you had mentioned we're all very similar. That I think actually is a perfect segue into the next question I was hoping to ask you, which was, what are the core values that have guided you in your life? And the reason I bring it up now is because I think when we look across the aisle, when we see people that look different than us, that sound different than us, especially in our current social and political environment. Like our differences can feel so stark and
Yeah.
like such a strong contrast. But
Mhm.
when we really boil down to our shared humanity, right? We all want love, we all value relationships, we all want to do something meaningful and contribute. There are kind of core values that we can all share and align on and agree on. And we actually see we're more similar than different in some circumstances.
Yes.
So yeah, it's something that's very prescient right now. Would love to hear what some of the core values are that you hold dear and that have guided you.
Sure. So for sure, and this is what I was hearkening back on before, and I will say that that concept of sort of service unto others obviously sort of has gotten to me, and that is sort of the principle that I think I started seeing in undergrad, and that always has, I mean, that sort of simple idea has stuck with me. I also am just, I mean, in a very simple term, the golden rule, do unto others as you have done to yourself. So like, I enjoy people. That's always been one of my skill sets. There will be people who can sort of run circles around me in terms of the quick computations in a finance class. But the EQ, I think we've all seen in the professional environment, is just as important. And that idea of sort of the connectivity with your peers, with your classmates, the ability that I worked on, I would say, obviously, the ability to be able to talk to our CEOs and senior most people at Goldman Sachs, but then also connect with the beneficiaries of our programs and those who we support. To be able to work across all sorts of people, that's a skill that we all can work on and continue to hone. And I find something, provided with good listening, which I also think is one of the sort of key skills that everyone can work on. Listening to all these different people and different perspectives, that's the best. Like I look forward to this Q&A, because to get something out of a conversation and really listen well is a skill. So those are some of the guiding principles, I would say, that I've taken through my career.
Thank you so much for sharing. And honestly, listening to you, I'm like beaming hearing it. Because a lot of these and I swear to everyone, this is not planned. It's not like we pre-aligned on the answers here. A lot of the values that you shared and aligned very, very closely to the values that we teach at Scholars of Finance. It's funny when we talk about compassion and being the core value we want to center our conversation around today. You had said service to others as your first kind of core value or principle that you live by. And at Scholars of Finance, we just launched our updated vision, mission, and values a couple of weeks ago. And we actually define compassion. We sort of summarize compassion as serve others. There are 4 key principles: foster relationships with respect and empathy, offer kindness and forgiveness to everyone, be generous with your time, energy, and resources, champion diversity, equity, and inclusion. Again, all of this laddering up to this key notion of serving others, right? Living a life of service. And even our mission at Scholars of Finance is about trying to create a world. Our vision is to create a world where all finance leaders steward capital to serve the greater good. Right? Service is even in our vision as an organization. And so with that, when you think about compassion being service, what does compassion mean to you? First and foremost, would love to hear your thoughts on compassion as a value.
Yeah, and I think and this sort of ties to some of the issues that you've talked on that we've seen in, for example, in our country this year. I think we all have been forced to have to think about what are the things that I've done, what are the ways in which I can help, for example, with racial equity and those issues. I always sort of thought, and it touches on before, and I've heard my friend Darren Walker, who runs the Ford Foundation, talk about, get proximate. And this was even before the events of this year. And obviously right now with the pandemic, you can't get too proximate, but anyway, you get what I mean. The idea of like in the old days, and someday we'll do this again, get close, really get to know someone and someone else. And I always did sort of really enjoy that element of my work. And I do think that's important to really understand, put yourself in someone else's shoes, and understand that work. I also think we've been trying through many, many different sort of paths at Goldman Sachs to have the conversations. I'm a part of a program that we call, it's sort of a coaching program for our colleagues from Black and Brown communities, and making sure they have a mentor, making sure they have a coach and a successful career at Goldman, sort of the paths that they need, so that the issues that we sort of see time and again of someone maybe not feeling comfortable to speak up in a meeting, or not being invited to that meeting in the first place, things like that. So helping to make sure that we have those opportunities there. So I think we are all developing a new set of muscles and having conversations that probably were never had before, and being comfortable to have that conversation.
I want to say that's amazing, and I feel like you're almost peering into my soul as you share this, because I feel this so tangibly, and I've spoke to a lot of our students and our members who have felt the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That we're in a unique period where a lot of us are truly relearning what compassion means,
Right.
and our understanding of compassion is deepening, right? And we're forced to exercise it more. Not being forced necessarily, but we're in a time where we're being invited to, and a lot of us are stepping into that.
Right.
And I'm curious, when you think about your career in financial services, we'll oftentimes hear from our students is, especially students who are seniors or juniors, they're in their final internship, or they're about to become an entry-level analyst. They've got their experience doing banking or doing finance, some finance function. And they say, oh, well, when I'm in a spreadsheet all day, what impact am I actually making?
Yeah.
Right now.
Right.
And one of the responses that I'll oftentimes offer is, in the long term, you're building towards a career where you can make investing decisions and place capital in places that serve others, that make the world better, that help improve lives. And along the way, every single day, we can act with integrity, humility, compassion, among other core values in our day-to-day interactions, at work, with our team, et cetera.
Right.
So that sort of, I think, brings up a tangible question. And to everybody else listening, this will be my last question. We'll open it to Q&A so everyone can join in the conversation. But I'm wondering, what are some of the ways that we can demonstrate compassion in finance, both through investing and through our daily interactions with team members and clients and other stakeholders?
Sure, and that is the very important point. So with all of this, I mean, I think it's how you guide yourself as an individual, and how I also think about it, how I guide my team. I mean, I want to be a leader that inspires them and gives them opportunity to grow too. So I think you eventually, as you grow in your team, you'll think, how do I want to be perceived as my team member? And then someday, how do I want to lead my team? And those sort of leadership skills. And once again, I always go back to listening. I mean, I think that that's so important, to just continually exercise your listening skills of what are your team members asking for, and what are those opportunities they need to continue to grow. So that's sort of the guiding principle of who you are. But then you think of, okay, and now where am I? Now, Goldman Sachs is remarkably, I mean, we are offering meditation now and lots of other wellness benefits, but ultimately you will find in some of your career paths that you guys are embarking on, it is a bank, and everything we do needs to be backed up by the data. So those spreadsheets that Ross mentioned are really important, because everything we do is measured and quantified, and we have to show the impact of the money that we're spending. We have to sell these ideas up to the senior most management. So those PowerPoint skills, which I also joked was like the other most valuable part of my MBA, we get really good at PowerPoint, that you really do use that in your career. And so so the idea of grounding your work in the data is just as important as sort of how you carry yourself as an individual. So both of those things get balanced. So on any given day, in fact, just today I was talking with my team, one of my team members, and just about how he needs to be a better salesman for himself, and make sure that other people at Goldman and some of these other folks that that they're aware of the good work he's doing. And that sort of ability to toot your own horn in a way that is you know, doesn't push others away. I think that that's important. So it's sort of how you carry yourself, what you want to accomplish as an individual. You know, for example, that colleague of mine, what does he want to accomplish for his individual career growth? But then when we think of how we report into our board, we report into all these senior leaders, that is grounded in data. And you have to be good with the numbers and the PowerPoint for those pieces. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Anne. Really, really appreciate it. With that, everybody, all of our students on the line, we'll now open this to open Q&A. So if you have a question, you can just feel free to unmute your line, all of our students here, and ask a question. Otherwise, you can use the raise hand feature and be added to the queue to ask your question.
All questions are good questions.
It looks like Akosia, you've raised your hand. You want to go first?
Yes. Hello, Anne. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's really exciting to hear you speak. Kind of my first question is, like, what's like the day-to-day functionality of like your line of work? You know, working with so many different grants and organizations on the philanthropic side. What does that look like?
Great. Yes. And will you guys just share with me where are you calling in from, and then also what school are you at? I'm curious to hear where everyone is these days.
Yes, I can quickly add that. Yeah, so my name's Akosi, everyone, and I am from the Stanford chapter, and I'm located here in Tampa, Florida right now.
Good, good. So for the day-to-day for me, so in my current job, I really do view my work as client-facing. And my clients, as I mentioned, I consider them, they're the firm's partners. So the Goldman Sachs partners and retired partners all are the ones who maintain accounts within Goldman Sachs Gives. So first and foremost, I try and espouse that sort of client mentality. Whatever they need, that goes to the top of my inbox, to the top of the calls that I'm making. They are my priority. And what they're often calling about, to get to sort of what does my day look like, they might be interested in joining a board of a nonprofit, and I get to know them, their interests, their financial capability, their time, all of those types of questions. And then I start sort of brokering introductions with different nonprofits that I know that are also looking for people. They could be looking to do, the way we think about it, Goldman Sachs Gives is sort of a coordinated effort. So for example, our head of investment banking is very involved with an organization called Team Rubicon that works with veterans here in the States and around the world. And it's veterans who have come back from service, and then they get to work in projects, and they work in disaster areas. And they've even done things during COVID as well. But anyway, so Greg, my colleague, is looking, how can I raise more money for Team Rubicon? And we talked about all the different ways that could be. So it's both helping craft an email for Greg to send to his partners to raise money. It's getting the head of Team Rubicon on our speaking circuit with our clients. The head of Team Rubicon has a book coming out. It's figuring out what are the ways. You can see on Goldman Sachs, we do a lot of like talks and things with authors and stuff. Can we get him on that? So helping to brainstorm whatever, you know, if the head of investment banking calls, I'm happy to help him. So first and foremost, I am working with my internal partners of Goldman. On any other given moment, we also have a stream of queries coming in from nonprofits. Now, the ones that are our current partners and grantees of ours, I would say I focus on like the top ones that get significant funding from us. And I've gotten to know them very well, and I know their CEOs well. And, you know, I'm often sort of in dialogue for a variety of reasons with them. Again, for some of those same reasons, whether it's speaking opportunities, introducing them to someone, a funding idea, whatever it might be. So working with nonprofits. Then there's a whole nother set of nonprofits that are trying to get to know us. And we have a variety of criteria we go through to see, you know, who rises up, and we do meetings with them and get to the point of proposals and that sort of thing. And then there's a whole other, there's a whole other sort of chunk of people, of sort of the Goldman Sachs people, like everyone else at Goldman. When you work in a corporation like ours, there's stuff that's coming through all the time in terms of like volunteering opportunities, speaking at recruiting sessions or hiring. So all sorts of stuff just for the general company. And then I would say a solid third maybe of my time is literally the administration and running of this fund. So Goldman Sachs Gives has about 600 million in assets right now. Those assets are managed internally by our firm's asset management division. So I'll work with them to sort of keep track of how our investments are doing. And then we also, then that goes in turn to our back office and our accountants and everyone else. And we're literally, sort of tracking our grant flow and our cash flows. And then all of the other sort of legal issues, HR, tax, things like that, that come up in running a global philanthropic fund. So it's all those different constituencies. And now you sort of see why every 15 minutes of my day is different.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. It's fun. It's a fun job. I feel grateful to have it.
Thanks, Anne, and thanks, Akosia. Joe, I see you had your hand up if you want to ask your question next. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Hi, Anne. Thank you so much for coming today. My name is Joe. I am a student at NYU, so great to hear from a fellow alum. I'm actually at home right now in Greenville, South Carolina. And my question just references the importance of EQ that you mentioned earlier. I was just wondering what advice you have for students like us in developing our EQ over time, like throughout our journey on campus or throughout our professional careers.
Yeah. That's a great question. And I also think what a hard year also to, develop and work on your EQ over Zoom. I mean, that's tough. And for example, one of my friends is they call it marketing, but she's basically a fundraiser for one of the big real estate and hedge funds here in New York City. And she's an awesome salesperson in person. And she said she has really had to change her game to be able to do a pitch with, on a screen like this, thinking of, meeting with the major California State Teachers Pension Fund, trying to ask them for, $500 million over Zoom is hard. And so I think we've all had to adjust that skill set, and getting to something like EQ. I think and I'm happy to share afterwards with Ross. I mean, I think there have been a couple nice books on this topic. I try and sort of periodically keep reading different things to sort of just help develop me as a professional. I also do other things at Goldman Sachs beyond my job, akin to sort of being on a campus. I've always liked to not just do my job at Goldman. So I'm involved in our women's network. When you get into a different company, especially larger companies, there's often affinity networks around sort of all the different topic areas. And I really do sort of feel like these are like my extracurriculars. So that gives me an opportunity to get to know other women at Goldman Sachs and sort of promote career growth and just different professional opportunities. That often is also networking, and that's, I guess, what I'm getting at. So the networking opportunities is a place where I think you can really sort of develop those soft skills as well. And then finally is the, making yourself available. I think the people who I've seen excel the most at Goldman are pretty much everyone at Goldman is happy to always be given an extra project. Like, no one's going to say, no, I can't do that. Like everyone sort of agrees like, yep, I'll take it on. If you're able to sort of think with your boss or your manager about what are the sort of really, what are the projects that will really distinguish me, that I can sort of really work on. And maybe that is sort of EQ related or something else that will really sort of drive the business, but also give you the opportunity for personal growth. You can work on that with your manager and find those opportunities, and that will sort of give you the opportunities. So if you sort of put all that together, I would say those are probably some of the things that have affected my ability to develop EQ over time.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I'd love to hear about this book that you mentioned afterwards.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and I think building on that, there's a couple really good resources on emotional intelligence out there. There's this course at Stanford's Business School, actually, they call it touchy-feely. Applied interpersonal dynamics. If anyone wants to note this down, they accept like 32 people per quarter for it, and it fills up in like 30 seconds online once the registration opens. But the funny thing about emotional intelligence is they teach you emotional intelligence is in the emotional brain, And so if you like read about it, you study it, you're like developing an understanding of it, but not actually like developing the emotional intelligence. One of the best things we can do is just have open, honest, like vulnerable conversations with people, being a great listener. There's a really good book, HBR 10 Must Reads on Emotional Intelligence, is one I'd recommend. Yeah. With that, we would love to open the floor to more questions.
Hi, Anne. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. My name's Iman. I go to Princeton, but I'm in New York City for the semester. I just wanted to ask, what acquired skills from your time at the American Museum of Natural History do you feel you've been able to kind of use in your current role at Goldman?
Sure. One of the things that I really loved about working at the museum, I love museums in general. So every time when you walk into your office, and I've realized this in retrospect, the beauty of working in a museum is that when you're walking to wherever your cubicle is or your office is, you're passing through all the collections. And so it's like just a really stimulating way to start your day. When you go and you pick up your lunch, you're passing whatever it might be. So there at the Museum of Natural History, was passing dinosaur fossils or meteorites, whatever it might be, but it was a fantastic place to work. And I think that I had the opportunity to work with all these sort of, nutty curators and scientists who work there, and it makes you curious. I was constantly, it was like still being in school, because my job there as a fundraiser, you have to listen to their projects and work with the curator or the scientist, really get to know what they're fundraising for, what they need, and then be able to write about that or talk about it with a potential donor. And I was doing what is called major gifts work at the time. So when you work in philanthropy as a fundraiser, when you do major gifts work, you're kind of like, everyone defines it differently, but say I'm looking for grants of $25,000 and up to 7, 8 figures, 9 figures when you really get to be sort of in the big leagues. But if I'm raising money, like we had a Darwin exhibit, and the Darwin exhibition was running at the time, like back in the day when Kansas and other places were just starting to say like evolution didn't really happen. It was like lunacy. And we were able to go out to some of the country's sort of biggest name people, Charlie Munger, who was Warren Buffett's #2, and others, and get this proposal in front of them, because we had sort of done our research and we knew that they would be potential funders. And that ability to sort of write and convey. And if you get curious you're curious and sort of interested enough in the topic, you become a very good salesperson for it. And so I always really enjoyed that process. And so those writing and communication skills that you learn as a fundraiser, invaluable. And in fact, the analyst on our team, and I don't know if she was able to join, I know Ross has met her, Rachel, who helped arrange this today for me, and Rachel Snyder from our team. She had this sort of same career path. She was working in development, and I really thought highly of her skill set. I knew she'd be a great writer. I knew she'd be sort of detail oriented in her work, and be sort of very thoughtful in how she presents ideas, having grown up in that path myself. And sure enough, she's worked very well at Goldman Sachs and been able to translate those skills really beautifully.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
With that, do we have any more student questions? If not, I see Skylar on the line has a question.
Sure. Hi, Anne. Thanks so much for your insights. My name is Skylar Barr. I'm actually on the Associate Board of Scholars of Finance, and I work at Goldman Sachs in the Investment Banking Division. I would love to hear what you think are sort of the key issues that we can help solve as a financial services firm. And further, would love to hear kind of what are the ones that we can help solve today, and what are the ones that we maybe aren't ready to tackle right now, but could solve in the future.
So we are, I just saw, there's Rachel. She probably doesn't want me to shout her out, but that's Rachel, who I was just mentioning, who's also worked in the museum with me and now is a colleague at Goldman. So Skylar, we have a running list of so many causes that we'd love to jump into at Goldman Sachs in a big way. I mean, so there are definitely the proposals out there for our senior executives, and there's a bunch that goes into figuring it out. Right now, we really feel very, we are seeing such amazing progress with our 10,000 small businesses effort. So you guys could see this on our website, but our 10,000 Women program sort of evolved, and we also now have another initiative called 10,000 Small Businesses, where we work with men and women small business owners in the US and the UK, and we will continue to look at other markets. And that measurement and evaluation that I was speaking about earlier, that program, we're seeing in incredible numbers in terms of when we provide this sort of business education through our Goldman Sachs grants to fund that program, and these business owners have the opportunity to go through our curriculum, which is like a very practical MBA. It's sort of not theoretical that you guys also get. It's a very practical business education. What they're able to do in terms of growing their revenue and job creation is enormous, and that has only gotten more difficult globally around the pandemic. So we will stay very involved in those issues. With that being said, there's a whole area of Goldman that you probably are seeing, but we are continuing our ESG work and really ramping that up in a big way. Our firm announced a new purpose statement earlier in the year, which was a signal of our sort of attention towards climate change. And I think, if anything, you know, I really do believe that everything with COVID and the pandemic, it is all tied. I mean, climate sort of exacerbates the effects of a pandemic. The pandemic has exposed all of the inequities that we, for example, out of Goldman Sachs Gives, we're working on in terms of educational opportunity, health and access, equity issues around health. So, I mean, it is all, those issues will continue what we've been working on. I would say those are two significant areas of grant making for us out of GS Gives, is the educational opportunity and access to and equity around health and medical. So those are going to continue being big for us. We will all collectively, in many different ways at Goldman, be tackling climate and environmental issues. And then I think our foundation will continue focused on the small business piece. And believe me, it goes on and on, though. I mean, it's a shame. There's too much to be done. There was just the other day, you know, we were looking at mental health as another topic to go big on. I mean, there's just such a long list of things we could do. And by the way, I'm leaving off, I mean, obviously the work around racial equity that we're doing is in fact now sort of running in each of those sleeves in different ways. So we're very attuned, and sort of the many hundreds of millions that we've done over the decade around communities of color, we are now sort of working to double down on that and think of what we can do in that space as well. So no shortage of opportunities, unfortunately. Just a slight shortage of capital unless we convince our executives.
Right.
That's great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. Thanks for the great question, Skylar, and thanks, Anne. Gio, I see you have a question and you're up next.
Thanks. Hi, Anne. Thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us today. My name is Gio. I'm a junior at Princeton, and I'm currently back at home in Los Angeles, California. I was wondering how you would define success in your role, especially because the fundamentals of philanthropy is to give. And so is success something that you can even measure in your role? And how would you check to see if you're going in the right direction?
Yeah. So you're exactly right that, I've had a few, laughs, I would say, with, so the partners at Goldman Sachs bring in the money and then we get to spend it. Now the partners who bring in the money and have P&Ls and investment banking like Skylar or others, they actually have a very, very obvious way in which they are measured and in which their comp and their bonus is determined at the end of the year. For us, it's not about the dollars that go out the door. Surely we're aware of what we're doing in terms of grant making, but I think we really try and focus on what is the impact of those grants. And so in a donor advised fund where we are literally making thousands of grants per year, some of those are small, and I be transparent and say we're not measuring every single one of those grants that are like $1,000 or whatever it might be, because we just don't have the capacity to do that. But we do have a sort of the ability to track our most significant partners, and that is the sort of KPIs, key performance indicators, that we look at in terms of how we're measured. And we have a few KPIs that we set up every at the beginning of every calendar year. Of course, this year we all did excellent planning in January, and then the world changed in February and March. And so lots of the projects that we had hoped to get to, you know, we've had to table, and we'll resume that. So things change, but in general, we go in every year, talk about what are those key measurements that we'll do with our bosses. And for us, it is things like, we also are sort of looking at the assets that we keep under management. How are those growing? So are we doing our best as trustees of this important fund to continue to grow it so that we have the capital to give things away? We're looking at the impact of these top grantees, and looking at other sort of measurements and standings. So that's what we do. Then I would like those small business programs are looking at those key measurements of like job creation, revenue growth, things like that. So we all have our different means by which we measure our work.
Thank you.
Sure.
Awesome. Great question, Gio. Nicholas, you're up next.
Yes, and first, let me thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm sure I'm not alone in saying so much of what you said deeply resonates with our values and mission at Scholars of Finance. My name is Nicholas. I'm from the Princeton chapter, and I actually went to a Jesuit high school, so similar to you, in service of others was an idea that was instilled early on. I'm curious, we might have touched on this a little bit earlier in the Zoom call, but specifically in the beginning of your career, how did you find ways to employ CSR and ESG values from entry-level positions in the finance industry? That is, what were some of the tangible ways of applying compassion, for example, in your work prior to becoming president at Goldman?
Well, since I will just share what I've noticed with other people, because I've always had the opportunity when in working at Goldman Sachs, I've always been in this team. We call it at Goldman Sachs the Office of Corporate Engagement, which encompasses all of the work of the foundation and the DAF that I run, et cetera. But for everyone else at Goldman, for example, so if you guys are a classic analyst in IBD or whatever it might be, at any big company nowadays, you have the ability to do a couple different things to sort of keep up this sort of compassion. There will always, I bet, like every employer knows now, that these culture building tools are important for the recruitment of good people and the retention of those people. And so there will be opportunities for you to volunteer. It might be at some companies like Goldman, we do a day of service. Now, of course, it's all virtual, but anyway, so at least one day a year. There are other companies that do upwards of 1 week, others that have sabbaticals when you've proven yourself more. So the opportunity to volunteer is one. You also might be offered the opportunity to join a junior board or an advisory council of a nonprofit. Like I said, I do placement of our senior people on boards. We also at Goldman Sachs are working on different placement programs for all different professionals, including, for example, our Black managing directors, making sure that they're on nonprofit boards. So there's all different opportunities for leadership on boards, and joining a nonprofit board, whether it's even a junior board or more senior, allows you to start building your network. And so when I'm looking at boards for our senior most people, I surely am looking to see what clients are on those boards, and is it a great network for our senior people. But I also think that's something for you guys, are people on the board that are interesting to you as you're starting out your career. So you can get involved in that. And those are usually sort of a smaller financial donation and maybe an hour or two of work a month or something, but it's a nice way to get to know a nonprofit. And then I think finally, there's loads of opportunities that you'll see where you can join like walks and runs. So again, whether it's through your company or on your own, but you can be a part of a team. So whether it's like in New York City, Cycle for Survival, or the JP Morgan Chase Corporate Challenge, Goldman Sachs sends a big team all different people do. And I know this year it's all virtual, so you do kind of, you're running on your own. But there's lots of different ways in which you can sort of do these activities where you can feel that you are, delivering on your sort of personal desire to have compassion and be this type of person at work. You just have to sort of find the time to do it at your job. But I think you'll find there are quite a number of opportunities for it.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Amazing. And everyone, we have 4 minutes left till the end of the hour. And it's very busy, and I know all of us are, so we'll end right on time. With that, we have time for one last question. And Ali, I see you have your hand up, so we'll have you close us out today.
Oh yeah, thanks, Ross. So yeah, hi, my name's Ali Sifaraki. I'm a second year at Columbia University. And I just wanted to ask, could you possibly expand on one of the most interesting projects for you personally that you've worked on in your time at Goldman Sachs Gives? And particularly, have any of them changed the way that you approach your role as a leader in the division?
Yeah, so one that we're right in the thick of right now. So you guys could look on our website if you wanted. So we run a competition called the Analyst Impact Fund at Goldman Sachs. And that is our analysts are, initial, that's the first few years of your time at Goldman Sachs, you are the analyst. So these are the sort of few thousand people that are right out of school. And when you join Goldman, you're invited to participate in this competition. And it was an idea that we had a few years ago. We are right now in our 5th year. The finals will be on November 10th. And we will have an external sign up so we can figure out if any of you guys want to dial in. It's 7:30 in the morning Eastern time. But in any event, when you're an analyst at Goldman, you receive this email now. You're allowed to self-organize into teams with your buddies or colleagues, whatever it might be. So with your colleagues at work, and you get to pick a nonprofit organization. We have a application form. You guys work on a 5-slide PowerPoint, and then you go through a variety of stages of competition. We literally just today, this afternoon, have gotten our final scores in, and we have the final 6 teams that have made it through. Now, we started with 733 analysts who started with this process with us, submitting applications in the summer. And so we literally now today have determined who those final 6 will be. And those final 6 will present in a global town hall at Goldman on November 10th. And the judges are our CEO, our CFO, and our partnership committee, which is one of the most senior committees at Goldman Sachs. And so it's an amazing opportunity for our young people to present in front of these senior most leaders. And as a Goldman person, it's a really fun day, like the culture of the firm, you really sort of get, you really see it, and this sort of commitment to nonprofits and to service. And so that program really kind of opened my eyes, because here I have worked in philanthropy for so many years. The nonprofit organizations that our young people find, many of them I haven't heard of. And I've just become, I've been introduced to just these amazing nonprofits now. And it's thanks to people that are, your guys' age, that are, it might be their buddy that set up this nonprofit, and, or whatever it is, but I've really enjoyed that project, because the sort of vitality and the passion that our young people bring is just amazing. And then they do a fantastic job. They work very hard on getting their presentations ready for that final round. And it's always a very impressive show. So that's been really fun.
Thank you.
Amazing, Ali, great question. Thank you so much. And everybody, thank you for all the excellent questions. And again, thank you for joining us. We're incredibly grateful and are inspired by all the incredible work you're doing at Goldman Sachs Gives. Everyone, we hope you have a wonderful week, and we look forward to having everyone back soon. Thank you for coming. And together, let's go out there and inspire character, integrity, and compassion in the finance leaders of tomorrow.